Alright guys, welcome on to Formula 1 news. It's race week for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix and Red Bull are painting a pretty bleak picture as to their prospects, not just from now to the end of the season, but potentially for 2025 as well. Christian Horner admitting that effectively Red Bull overcomplicated their car concept this year, and compared to a design such as McLaren's, they now find themselves in an increasingly tricky position, potentially having to take several steps backwards if they want to go forward at all from now until the end of 2025. I don't imagine this is what Max Verstappen wants to hear, but this weekend is another massive one in the context of the World Championship battle. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. A double-header street race, of course, coming up with Baku this weekend, Singapore the weekend after, then for some reason 3 weeks off before we go to Austin and start the Americas leg, then to the Middle East to end out the year. You know how it goes. Yuki Tsunoda, Red Bull driver for RB at least, he actually received, and has talked about this now, multiple offers at the start of the year. We know that he had a really good start to the season when RB were actually pretty good. Now they're trash, and unfortunately it's not helping the case of Tsunoda or Ricciardo. And to be fair, in Monza, they brought what has been widely considered the worst upgrade of the year, at least by the team themselves. Tsunoda says they brought parts to Monza and they just didn't do at all what they thought they would do. So that probably shows that the Red Bull wind tunnel that Tsunoda's team, RB, and Red Bull Racing use is not exactly delivering the results on either side that they would like to be seeing at the moment. But Yuki got offers from other teams, probably not especially high up their teams. And of course, you know, Yuki still holds out some hope that he might get the Red Bull seat. So I think certainly at the time it made sense to stay. In hindsight, had he got an offer from Williams or from a team of that caliber, maybe it was worth thinking about. But if it was from a team like Sauber, then sure, I get it, right? And obviously their team is tragic right now. It seems like they've narrowed it down to 2 drivers. The rumour has it that either Bottas will stay in the team or they will sign Gabriel Bortoleto, a driver that has been backed by many and has definitely proved his worth lately in Formula 2. I would still keep Bottas alongside Hülkenberg personally, then you really know where things stand. But then again, if you've got Hülkenberg, do you need Bottas? I mean, I guess you can debate that question, to be fair. Both good qualifiers, both maybe, maybe stronger in quali than the race. Factors like this, of course, Hülkenberg's kind of been known for his not exactly great tyre deg throughout his career. Bottas has been known for maybe his, lacking racecraft compared to some other drivers, but still very solid drivers. And they will show you where your car is. They're absolutely going to do a job, those two guys. But then there's the prospect of, well, if you bring a rookie in, it's more exciting. There's more upside maybe. But look, I want Bottas to stay on the grid. I'm hoping that happens, to be fair. Ollie Behrman is driving for Haas at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix this weekend, replacing Magnussen, who's banned. The funny thing is about Magnussen's ban is that he got to 12 penalty points, gets a race ban. Now he's back to 0 again from Singapore. And we know that he's not going to be in Formula 1 next year, right? There's no seats available. He's out of Haas. He's going to drive some other series. So this is why the penalty point system is maybe kind of controversial, because there's nothing really stopping Magnussen coming back after his ban and going even more, maximum terrorism that he was doing before, right? Because he's only got 8 races and he's not going to get another race ban. So why not just go full hold up the field? I mean, Miami was like the most egregious because he was literally cutting corners to keep the field behind him behind. Like, it was outrageous. So, that's the type of driving that needs to be punished by like a drive-through penalty within 3 laps, in my opinion, because otherwise what are you going to do to stop it? But look, he's done his best, Magnussen, this year to help Haas and Hülkenberg score as many points as possible, and it has worked. And he's going to be back from his break with 0 points on his license. So, what's stopping him continuing in that vein, right? But with Behrman going to the Haas, Gabriele Mini is going to take his drive at Prema. Pretty exciting. Nearly won Mini the Formula 3 championship this year, and he's going to be Italian driver alongside Antonelli, Italian driver, in the Prema for the Baku Formula 2 round. So pretty exciting, I would say, to compare those two in the same machinery. Who knows how good the Prema's going to be? It was good here last year, might not be so good here this year. He's an Alpine junior as well, and speaking of Alpine, they have said that in a few weeks, basically, they're going to decide whether they keep their own engine or whether they abandon it and effectively buy Mercedes engines from 2026. They're probably going to buy the Mercedes engines. But of course, you guys might remember it was the Dutch Grand Prix, or maybe it was Monza actually, when there was loads of protests from Alpine kind of representatives, shall we say, from the engine department, who were not so happy with the fact that they're going to shut down that project. So lots of drama. It's Alpine, lots of drama, no real surprise. Now, Aston Martin tomorrow at 11 a.m. are hosting a press conference. I wonder what this could possibly be about. Rumour has it that yes, Adrian Newey is going to get confirmed to Aston Martin tomorrow. This has been rumoured rumoured for a few days. BBC Sports said it the other day. Sky Sports are now going to live broadcast this press conference, so I think we can probably put 2 and 2 together on this, and it isn't really a massive secret at this point. Of course, it's a rumoured 5-year deal worth potentially £30 million a year, including bonuses and all those other things on top. And obviously there's been some discussion, why didn't it work out with Ferrari? Because we all know that conversations were had. Fred Vasseur actually confirmed to L'Equipe that yes, conversations were had, and he had the following to say: the ideas that he had differed from mine about his role. There have been conversations though, and maybe one day we will agree. So this kind of says to me that at least it's plausible that Ferrari were Newey's kind of first option, but Newey had his demands, and there was a rumour a few weeks ago now that Newey basically said, look, I want some veto power over technical decisions, and I think Newey probably felt that given that this team has not won a world championship in a very long time, it needed a serious overhaul in their management of their engineering department if they were to turn it around. And Newey not only wanted to design the car, but also to some extent at least manage that process and become almost like a pseudo team principal or a de facto team principal in some ways. And you can say, oh, I can't believe Newey's ego is this big. Well, firstly, like if he has an ego that big, fair enough, because he's earned it. But equally, there's other problems about joining Ferrari anyway. You've got to move to Italy. Like, it's understandable that Newey will say, look, I'm willing to go through the problems that are associated with joining Ferrari, the politics, the Italian, etc., etc., if you can say, I can get these things. And if you can't say I can get these things, then we're not going to be able to come to a deal, and Lawrence Stroll is going to give me whatever I want. So it is what it is, and that's kind of what Vasseur says. But as he says, an individual cannot determine the outcome of an entire team. The collective is always stronger than the individual, he says. So, committing Ferrari are to saying, look, all right, we don't need Newey. It'd been nice if we could have had him, but they're not going to get him. He's going to go to Aston Martin with that Honda partnership. Who knows about the Verstappen partnership as well? We might hear more about it from this. So this is Jake Humphries, who of course runs that kind of, I wouldn't say controversial, but he has this high performance podcast, right? He's done a few of these. I think there was one with Alex Albon that came out not that long ago. And here he is with Adrian Newey, ready to go in a couple of days. And well, he says, you excited for this in a couple of days? So sounds like it's going to air after the official announcement, which makes me think that maybe they discuss things that are not going to be official for another 24 hours. And once they are, then, maybe in that release, then they will talk about those things once the embargo is lifted. I guess you can argue that. So we'll see. Speaking quickly of Ferrari, no upgrade for them in Baku, although they can probably run, well, I don't know. I mean, at Baku, you can run a pretty low downforce setup. You tend to go medium to low because there's a massive straight, which isn't massively dissimilar to the setup you might run at Monza. Of course, it is a different circuit in many ways. And it is a circuit that saw a lot of bouncing back in 2022, especially from the Mercedes. I mean, Hamilton, if you guys remember the race in 2022 in the W13, he was chasing Gasly, I think, at one point, and he nearly smashed into the wall at 200 miles an hour because his car was bouncing out of control through the fast left-right-hander onto the massive straight and managed to save it. That was the lap. I'm talking a really niche reference here, but watching that Grand Prix, Hamilton was 4 tenths behind Gasly, and all of a sudden he was a second and a half and was like, what's going on? That's what happened. He nearly bounced into the wall, which was bad. I mean, it was a bad race for his spine as well. It was getting absolutely destroyed. So it is a weekend where if bouncing is a problem, then it may be exposed. But of course, the bouncing we see now from especially Ferrari once they brought that upgrade a few rounds ago and has potentially been corrected with their Monza upgrades is not the same as the type of bouncing we saw and the real porpoising we saw in 2022, which no team really experiences today. New front wing, though, is planned for Ferrari. It's just going to arrive a little bit later. So we're back to a street circuit. We've had 5 so far. Saudi is definitely one. Australia is technically a street circuit. Sure, Canada is kind of a street circuit. It's kind of more like a hybrid, right? But nonetheless, Australia, Canada, they don't really feel like street circuits, but technically they are. Miami definitely does. Monaco definitely does. And we have 3 more to go. Azerbaijan, Singapore, and then, of course, Las Vegas towards the end of the year. This season, these are the results over those rounds. Verstappen, Leclerc, Norris really leading the way. Perez usually good at street tracks, and certainly Baku and Singapore. It's an important weekend, isn't it, for Checo? Because if he doesn't perform here, then he's not going to perform anywhere, let's be real. These are his tracks in many respects. Singapore and Azerbaijan are pretty much tailor-made for the type of driving style that Checo Perez has. So he will be better, I'm pretty sure, this weekend than he has been recently. Whether he'll be better enough, that of course is maybe doubtful, and it's historically been a very dramatic Grand Prix over the last few years, and there's been multiple winners. The only multiple winner over the last few years is Checo Perez himself, is it not? Compared to all the other champions that we have had win or lose here over the last 5 or so years. But Red Bull, they're in a very interesting position because there's talk from race fans, and understandably, what if they turn up this weekend and they are once again the 4th fastest car? Because they were in Monza. It was obviously McLaren, Ferrari, kind of neck and neck. Maybe McLaren probably fastest. They won 2 qualifying after all. Then Mercedes, then Red Bull. Right, so that was a confusing one for Red Bull, absolutely. And given where they started the year, it seems almost impossible that what we are currently seeing could be the case. But if they do end up 3rd or 4th fastest again this weekend in Azerbaijan, which seems unlikely just given the nature of the track and their car and like the straight line speed advantage that it's historically had, but that's not really the case anymore, especially with the front wings now that McLaren and Mercedes have that can really deviate a lot from their standard position to reduce drag under high load on the high speed on the straights. That doesn't really give Red Bull much advantage there anymore. And, you know, it's difficult to say because Red Bull don't seem to even understand themselves where they're going to be good, where they're going to be bad. So if they end up the 4th fastest again, or even 3rd fastest, McLaren are likely going to be the fastest car because they have been on average for the last 10 or so rounds. The championship at that point is absolutely McLaren and Lando Norris's to lose in some respects because, you know, that should be a good point swing, but Max is almost always going to maximize the possibility on every particular weekend. Max, of course, has recently described the car as a monster, gone from being like unstoppable to a monster. We've talked about the reasons why. The question really is how, on some level, have Red Bull fallen this far, and what, if anything, can they potentially do about it? It's quite interesting to imagine why they took the steps that they did. You guys remember when we saw the first rumours about the RB20? They'd brought the cannons to the car. There were rumours they were almost going to bring like 0 pods. They'd taken some ideas and some inspiration from last year's Mercedes, and it seemed like they weren't happy enough with the RB20, or the RB19, sorry. The RB19 had very few weaknesses. I think it was slightly weaker in the slower speed corners than they would like, and it was slightly weaker over the curbs than they would like. Apart from that, the RB19 was basically perfect, right? And they have clearly tried to take further steps, but apparently Red Bull have overcomplicated things. That's certainly what Christian Horner has to say. And I wonder if they did that because they were wondering, or maybe worried, about hitting the ceiling of this concept, right? I mean, the RB19 seemed in many respects like a perfect car, and maybe Red Bull thought, well, there's not much we can do to improve on this. If we want to improve, we have to take a bit more risk and go a certain way. And this, of course, is when, in hindsight, we hear that Adrian Newey's ideas on what they should have done with the car were dismissed by Pierre Wachet's team. They wanted to go a different direction, and maybe that was part of the reason why Newey said, all right, guys, you have it your way, right? I'm out of here, and have fun with the consequences. The confusing thing, of course, is that the consequences were mind-bogglingly good for the first 7 rounds, first 5-6 rounds, and then quite quickly, that's no longer the case. But, you know, whatever's happens this year, it's quite clear that their car is struggling big time, and this is what Horner says. If you look at McLaren, it's almost an evolution of last year's car, a much simpler car than ours. Perhaps we have gone a little too complex with the RB20, and perhaps we need to simplify a few things. So definitely ease to the idea that maybe they felt like they were hitting a ceiling, or maybe they felt like they were just invincible and therefore they could take a bit of risk. That's always one of the things that can creep in when you're dominating, is a bit of complacency, right? Maybe the engineers thought, well, you know, everything we're touching right now turns to gold. This seems to work in the wind tunnel. This seems to work in the CFD. Run it up. It's going to make our car even faster. The reality is, in these set of regulations, pushing the limits does not seem to be, you know, particularly possible. It's possible to get close, but it's not possible to break the laws of physics. And this is when things are particularly interesting in this set of regulations compared to basically anything that we've seen in recent Formula One past. Usually, as the regulations get closer to their conclusion, the teams are able to get closer and closer to a perfect car, and they just keep increasing performance. But with the ground effect era that we currently have, it's not really possible to do that, because the more you add downforce to the floor, the more you risk the possibility of creating balance problems from the potential small micro bouncing or major bouncing that can potentially create. And it does seem like it's true what Adrian Newey observed at the start of 2022, that the key is balance, the key is compliance, the key is consistency of ride height, and consistency of overall downforce generated. That is what they initially achieved, Red Bull, and it's remarkable to imagine really that so many of these teams have been unable over the last few years to perfect really anything. McLaren are getting the closest right now. They have a very consistent car. It may not be, the absolute best performing in every single corner type, but overall over the course of a lap, it is going to be the most consistent and very rarely, has understeer or oversteer moments particularly, to be honest, even though it might not be an absolute dominant machine on some levels. And, Ferrari have had their issues. 2022, they were porpoising all over the place despite still being kind of fast. Obviously, last year was a disaster, relatively speaking. Mercedes struggled for 2 years, but they seem to have finally understood what to do. And even Red Bull, the team that seemed to be super on top of things, they, it seems, have fallen into similar traps. But equally, as I've said before, this was the gap in race pace between Red Bull and McLaren at the start of the season. 8 tenths, 7.5 tenths. 5.5 tenths, 9 tenths in Shanghai, and then that went to 0 for a few rounds, and then that went to an advantage McLaren for a few rounds. So, you've got to wonder, haven't you, exactly what's been going on here, because does it seem likely that McLaren brought an upgrade in Miami worth a second a lap? Probably not. It seems to me, as I've said before, there was probably something else going on with the Red Bull. But, and obviously in Hungary, Red Bull brought another upgrade, which turned out to probably be a downgrade. And then obviously since then in Zandvoort, there was another upgrade from McLaren, and the rest since then is history, obviously. That's though the difficulty for Red Bull, because if their car is overcomplicated, what are you meant to do, right? All you can do this season is try and find the best possible setup and maybe bring a couple of ideas. But for next year's car, you find yourself in a really tricky position because you don't want to regress. It doesn't look like Red Bull want to turn up to next year and the RB21 basically looks like the RB19 all over again. That just feels like a big problem for them to deal with, and also psychologically it's a challenge, right? You want to take steps forwards, but seemingly they've realized that in certain elements they might have overcomplicated things. They've got to get back to some degree of simplicity, but by the time they make those changes and revert things on their car, they may, have to go backwards before they can go forwards. But obviously going backwards and going forwards as a result takes time, and it's not necessarily time that they have, given where, let's say, McLaren presently are. Mika Häkkinen, let's not forget, right? Last year, at the start of the season, he made this claim that McLaren were going to be the team taking the challenge. And that seemed like an outrageous claim when they were nowhere last year, McLaren, at the start of the year, and Red Bull were dominating. All of a sudden, Häkkinen was proved to be correct. Over the coming months, they brought upgrades, and they actually were in the fight at the end of the season for race wins. So maybe it's worth listening to Häkkinen when he's talking about McLaren. Maybe there's some bias because he raced for them, but he says McLaren has the tools, they have the drivers, they have the designers, they have the management, they have the mega fantastic partners financing this great team. I don't think anybody is going to catch them. So, speak of that, or take that, I suppose, how you will. But, this whole saga as it continues, especially with Christian Horner not painting an especially pretty picture for what the coming months look like for Red Bull, is probably going to make Verstappen's face look like this more often than not. And of course that might make this man rather happy about the situation, but very much interested your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.